Hello. This is the beginning of the chapter on politics. Yep, here we go. Sorry, you can watch my little plant, which is totally fake. Don't expect it to grow. Section 1. The key to power over the world was in his grasp, literally, and it horrified the young hobbit. "Take it, Gandalf," Frodo pleaded. Gandalf replied, "Don't tempt me, Frodo. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe. Understand me, Frodo. I would use this ring from a desire to do good, but through me it would wield a power too great and terrible to imagine. Would you take the ring?" Generations of readers of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy have asked themselves this question. Tolkien presented it as a devil's bargain, best articulated by Lord Acton. Power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The ring represented absolute power. Its possession portended absolute corruption. Portended is the warning that something momentous or calamitous is likely to happen. Free vocabulary word there. Power tempts everyone. Those who have felt helpless and oppressed, those who do not feel sufficiently respected, those who shudder at the immense power of evil have all heard the voice of power quietly urging, "Take the ring." Power, simply, is the ability to do something or act in a particular way. People talk about power all the time. A powerful serve in tennis, a powerful engine in a race car, or even consumer products such as power drinks. The power to influence society is an altogether different consideration, entailing the authority to do good in tension with the temptation to accomplish that good through evil means. This is nowhere truer than in politics. Polis is the Greek word for city or community, and politikos is of or relating to the citizens within a community. Politics then seeks to answer the question, what is the best way to use power in order to organize community for the citizens? Politics often calls to mind political commercials of people with fake smiles, wearing suits and kissing babies. Though politicians are often portrayed as silly and pompous, the study of politics matters. Everyone lives in multiple political jurisdictions, neighborhoods, cities, counties, states, nations. Where you live implies a set of personally applicable rules, but who makes those rules? Who picks the rule makers? Properly conceived, politics offers a platform from which to encourage virtue, and virtue is at the heart of good government. To those who think liberty alone is necessary, the great British statesman Edmund Burke said, "What is liberty without wisdom and without virtue? It is the greatest of all possible evils, for it is folly, vice, and madness without tuition or restraint," meaning without control. With this backdrop, let us take a brief tour through political thought, often called political philosophy. We'll then examine each of the 6 worldviews to see how they understand this endeavor so critical to human flourishing. Section 2, History and Philosophy of Politics. If you think politics is pristine, you've never seen a political campaign. In America, nasty accusations have been part of political campaigning from the beginning. In its opposition to Abraham Lincoln, for example, the Albany Atlas and Argus newspaper. Okay, remember, Abraham Lincoln, back in the 1800s, the newspaper, the Atlas and Argus, claimed that he was the ugliest man in the Union. Of course, Lincoln handled the accusations with his characteristic dry wit. When accused of being two-faced, Lincoln replied, "I leave it to my audience. If I had another face, do you think I'd wear this one?" Campaign chicanery aside, questions about good governance are deadly serious. People have different interests and concerns. Conflict is inevitable. Aristotle said that because we are thinking creatures living in community, we are by our very nature political animals. Harvard political science professor Harvey Mansfield elaborates on the analogy in this way. Other animals are gregarious, bees, for example, but they are not political because they do not speak or reason about what is advantageous and harmful, just and unjust, good and bad. They're confined to feeling pain and pleasure. Human beings have to reason about these matters, as they are not perfectly clear. To the degree that we have the power of reason and live in community with one another, political engagement is necessary for healthy human society. More than just about anything else, political ideas carry the greatest consequences for greater numbers of people. Billions can be affected. Decisions that promoted freedom have brought blessing to nations all over the world, while decisions that squelched freedom have led to bloodshed and misery. Once again, ideas have consequences. What you believe about how to rule in the best interests of the citizens depends on what you believe about human nature. Two views have emerged in history, the sin nature view and the pure nature view. Obviously, there are many intermediate positions, but for the sake of introduction, we'll focus on the sin nature and pure nature views in particular. Let's look at the sin nature view of politics first. The idea of sin goes back to Scripture. Both the Old and New Testament words for sin imply losing one's way, straying from a path, or cracking one's relationship with God. In political terms, the sin nature is the idea that humans are violent and government is necessary to secure peace via social contract. The term social contract refers to the agreement citizens enter into with a government to secure protection from those who would harm them. Without this social contract, English political philosopher Thomas Hobbes famously said that human life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. John Locke, another famous English political philosopher, suggested that the social contract secures our natural rights to life, health, liberty, and possessions. So what political power should government have then? According to Locke, no more than the people give it. Political power, then, I take to be a right of making laws, with penalties of death and consequently all less penalties for the regulating and preserving of property, and of employing the force of the community in the execution of such laws, and in the defense of the commonwealth from foreign injury, and all of this only for the public good. Locke's philosophy had a dramatic influence on America's founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson, for example, considered him to be one of the three greatest men who ever lived, along with Isaac Newton and Francis Bacon. Samuel Rutherford was also influential. A Scottish Presbyterian pastor and theology professor at the University of St. Andrews, Rutherford published a book in 1644 called Lex Rex, which means the law is the king. It was a direct confrontation of the idea that kings rule by divine right, and whatever they do is right because God put them into that position. In other words, kings were above the law and the common morality expected of citizens. Rutherford was condemned to burn at the stake for proposing this idea, but he died before a sentence could be carried out. A contrasting view might be called the pure nature view of politics. As articulated by the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, this political view says people may not know what goodness is, but this does not necessarily make them bad. Under the right conditions, Rousseau argued, human beings are perfectible. If individuals are corrupt, it is society that corrupts them. Rousseau inspired those who sparked the French Revolution. Many Americans, including Jefferson, thought Francis's bid for freedom was a promising echo of the American Revolution. Many Americans, including Jefferson, thought France's bid for freedom was a promising echo of the American Revolution, but their hopes dissolved as the revolutionaries took a hard turn toward revenge. Apparently, these revolutionaries believed not in reforming society, but in destroying it and rebuilding an altogether new society. When the dust settled, the revolutionaries had executed more than 40,000 people. One of the leading revolutionaries, Maximilien Robespierre, we're going with that, forthrightly justified his vengeful spirit in an address on Christmas Day, 1793. He said, "The revolutionary government owes to the good citizen all the protection of the nation. It owes nothing to the enemies of the people but death. If the revolutionary government must be more active in its march and more free in its movements than an ordinary government, is it for that less fair and legitimate? No, it is supported by the most holy of all laws, the salvation of the people." It is ironic that Robespierre's belief in his own purity led him to unflinchingly send his enemies to horrifying death. Even more ironic was that just a few months after his Christmas Day address, the revolutionaries he had inspired and trained guillotined Robespierre without trial. As with Haman of old in the Book of Esther, Robespierre found himself facing the gallows he had built for others. Most of the American founders distrusted the pure nature view. They knew that human nature tended toward corruption. Even those with unassailable character would bring disaster if they ruled without accountability. Just as the French Revolution confirmed this thesis for the founders, the bloodshed of the 20th century confirms it for us today. No half-century ever witnessed slaughter on such a scale, said Nuremberg judge and future Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson. Such cruelties and inhumanities, such wholesale deportations of peoples into slavery, such annihilations of minorities. As we have said many times, ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences, and the consequences of a belief in the inherent goodness of human beings, the inherent goodness of human beings are tragic. Both the sin nature and pure nature views are social contract views. Today, a new social contract view has emerged owing to the work of Harvard philosopher John Rawls, and asks a procedural question: how should society's resources be distributed? Rawls' view is thus called distributive justice, and it is seen as an important advance in philosophy and politics. Even Rawls' primary opponent, fellow Harvard philosopher Robert Nozick, said political philosophers now must either work within Rawls' theory or explain why not. Theoretically, distributive justice is a question of law, but since it bears on how political structures should be set up, and since students will most likely run into it in political science courses, we think it is worth examining in a little more detail. Society exists, Rawls thought, because individuals surrender some of their rights in exchange for protection. But prejudice has led to an unequal distribution of resources, making it difficult for some people to succeed. Distributive justice advocates favor spreading the wealth through redistribution. This should sound really current and really familiar. By the equal distribution of social goods, Rawls meant not only income and wealth, but also liberty, opportunity, and self-respect. All of these must be distributed equally, he said, unless it is to everyone's advantage to have them not so distributed. This could be done, Rawls believed, in an unbiased fashion. A generation of political science students studied John Rawls' ideas. One of them, Barack Obama, while running for office, actually told a potential voter, "I think when you spread the wealth around, it's good for everybody." This is a Rawlsian idea, and many people think it sounds compassionate, but remember what redistribution means? The government is coercing, that's a fancy word for forcing, some people to give up their resources by threat of punishment so they may be given to others. Distributive justice makes several controversial assumptions about the world and humanity, including the following. Social goods can be quantified. We know how to count money and assess the value of wealth, but how do we quantify liberty, opportunity, or self-respect? Redistribution accomplishes fairness, which assumes that the current distribution arose through unfairness. Resources are best in the hands of people who want them, rather than those most capable of stewarding them. Redistribution is the morally right thing to do. People are basically good. If disadvantages were removed, they would be able to succeed. People actually want to succeed, yet even in fairly well-ordered societies, there are those who want to fail and sabotage their own success through addictions, risk-taking, or self-destructive behavior. Only persons who are able to claim their rights actually have them. The unborn, the feeble, and the elderly do not factor into these considerations. Having briefly toured the history of political philosophy, we are now ready to look at how each of the 6 worldviews we are studying deals with political questions. Each begins with different assumptions and therefore arrives at different conclusions. As thoughtful citizens, we need to understand this if we are to articulately defend the truth. 3. Secularism. Liberalism is a term often associated with a secularist approach to politics. Historically, liberalism referred to a political philosophy based on individual freedom and democratic rule, often called political conservatism in the United States today. But today, political liberalism refers to a set of political positions such as guaranteeing a woman unrestricted access to abortion, promotion of same-sex marriage, redistribution of wealth, heavy regulation of business, and affirmative action. Another term encompassing much of the secular view of politics is progressivism, which is the belief that political systems can be used to help people progress toward economic prosperity, social safety, and an advanced society. Often, liberalism and progressivism merge under the presumed belief that liberal political positions are the means by which progress will occur. Obviously, many secularists disagree with one or more of these positions, but there is a very close relationship between atheism, materialism, and naturalism, and those who embrace liberal political views. Remember, a secular worldview assumes we are evolving animals who are now capable of seeking our own perfection as a species. Julian Huxley, who believed that all reality is a single process of evolution, wrote, "The evolutionary process is at last becoming conscious of itself and is beginning to study itself with a view to directing its future course." In order for humanity to evolve in this way, Francis Williams said, we must stop thinking politically as capitalists or communists, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, or Buddhists, and think as secularists. A world in which men have both hydrogen bombs and closed minds is altogether too dangerous. Clearly, Williams thought secularists are the open-minded ones. Is it ever possible to have a stable political foundation if there is no moral truth based on God's nature and character? Secularists affirm that it is. Secularist philosopher Sidney Hook said, "We have rights because of our ability to participate in society. The rights of man depend upon his nature, needs, capacities, and aspirations, not upon his origins. Children have rights not because they are our creatures, but because of what they are and will become. It is not God, but the human community that endows its members with rights." Hook would have been uncomfortable with the "there are no moral truths" mantra. For him, morality was whatever a society agrees is right. The democratic, open society must be neutral to all religious overbeliefs, but no matter how secular it conceives itself to be, it cannot be neutral to moral issues. It seeks to draw these issues into the area of public discussion in the hope that a reasonable consensus may be achieved. Based on its framework of rights, secularism seems to favor the principles of distributive justice, because only people who are equal economically can participate equally in the political realm. V.M. Charkonde said, "A genuine political democracy is not possible in the absence of economic democracy." To political scientist Walter Truett Anderson, This lack of economic democracy hinders society's progress. When people are deprived of the fundamental necessities, as are millions of Americans and even more millions of human beings in other countries, their capacity for development is frustrated at the most basic level. We can all agree that there is injustice and poverty in the world, but what is the solution? To political liberals like Tarkunde and Anderson, the answer is economic democracy, which political theorists recognize to be code for socialism. Not all secularists support such a thing. Milton Friedman wrote, "The use of force to achieve equality will destroy freedom, and the force introduced for good purposes will end up in the hands of people who use it to promote their own interests." As a secularist and an agnostic, Friedman embraced, indeed championed, a free market approach to economics. The drive toward equality of outcome, he thought, would destroy the freedom to prosper. We'd all be worse off. But Friedman wasn't alone among secularists in this way of thinking. A fast emerging philosophy of economics today is libertarianism, which holds up complete individual liberty as the highest good. Libertarianism, in its modern form, has a significant history in the thought of 1964 Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, economist Murray Rothbard, and more recently in the writing of John Rawls' opponent quoted earlier, Robert Nozick. Another figure in the movement, Ayn Rand, Anne Rand, wrote a series of novels to outline, her philosophy of objectivism. These novels, including Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, have gained a new popularity in our time. Each year, Rand's books still sell more than 1 million copies, promoting the idea of libertarianism, radical individualism, and an unflinching promotion of self-interest. While many Christians find themselves compelled by libertarian arguments, their interest is often rebuffed when it comes to certain social issues such as marriage and abortion. Since it is believed that our knowledge of truth is always evolving, secularism is always on the lookout for new ideas. New is almost always assumed to be superior. Julian Huxley admitted this tendency. Major steps in the human phase of evolution are achieved by breakthroughs to new dominant patterns of mental organization, of knowledge, ideas, and beliefs, ideological instead of physiological or biological organization. The fixation on breakthroughs leading to further evolution underscores the utopian nature of the secular worldview. It is a progressive view. Our genes have figured out how to push us toward survival. Our ethics have evolved as a survival mechanism, and those whose ethics do not lead to survivability do not survive. Perfectibility is an expectation. Over time, perfectible people should be able to create a nearly perfect government, right? Utopian visions have one thing in common. Everyone in the world must go along for them to work. A nation or group of nations could derail the plan by a lack of cooperation, and this must not be allowed. This is why secularists commonly speak in the language of global consciousness or even world government. An example from Paul Kurtz. Today there are powerful forces moving us toward a new ethical global consciousness. Kurtz was a secular humanist evangelist. It's no surprise to hear him advocate his view as the answer. Humanism, we believe, can play a significant role in helping to foster the development of a genuine world community. At present, global consciousness doesn't seem to be working out too well for secularists, especially those in America. Global political strategist Ian Bremmer says the percentage of people in the world who think the United States should mind its own business is at an all-time high. At the same time, other nations do not seem interested in stepping forward and becoming the organizing force for international cooperation. Particularly in today's economic climate, it's every nation for itself, pursuing its own aims of advancement. Gathering nations together to agree on anything important, Bremer says, is like herding cats together with animals that don't like cats. Leading secularists are baffled by the resistance of the world's nations to the idea of world government, which they believe must be put in charge by force if necessary. At least this seems to have been the mindset of Lucille W. Green, a longtime secular activist promoting world government, who said ominously in a 1968 article, "All those who share the vision of the human community as part of one world should be willing to take any measures that will awaken world opinion to bring it about." C.S. Lewis was prophetic in this regard. In his book, The Abolition of Man, he referred to the conditioners who have a utopian vision for recreating society. But the man molders of the new age will be armed with the powers of an omnicompetent state and an irresistible scientific technique. We shall get at last a race of conditioners who really can cut out all posterity in what shape they please. The path of the conditioners is based on the idea that people, some of them at least, are inherently intelligent and good. They are worthy to be conditioners and to make decisions on our behalf. They believe their motives are pure and that they can be trusted with complete power to transform society. As we will see, the Christian view does not, as secularism does, dispense with the idea of human fallenness. Christianity admits that we are inherently corrupt and in need of accountability, and that we are not and cannot be smart enough to manipulate our way to a better life for everyone. The best we can do is try to secure justice and freedom so people can do what they think best for themselves, their families, and their communities. Marxism. Section 4. In classical Marxism, all politics is really about economic power. Classical Marxists define political power as controlling the means of production. Contemporary Marxists, discussed later, see the world as structured between the haves, which is the core, and the have-nots, the periphery. Karl Marx called economic structures the real foundations on which rise moral, legal, and political superstructures, and to which definite forms of social consciousness correspond. To use a Lord of the Rings allusion, economics is the one ring to rule them all. Once a nation's economic structure is rightly ordered, Marxists believe politics will fall in line behind it. We'll cover economics in detail in the next chapter, but for now let's review the key terms from the earlier chapter devoted to Marxism. Communism, the Marxist ideal of classless utopian society in which all property is commonly owned. Capitalism, an economic system in which private citizens own the means of production rather than the government, and in which prices are determined by competition. Marxists don't like capitalism. Socialism, the abolition of private property. A communist society will be based on socialism, the claim that the banning of private property will lead to everyone owning everything. Marxists see a democratic state or republic, especially in a capitalist economic system, as undesirable. According to Friedrich Engels, the modern state, no matter what its form, is essentially a capitalist machine. For V.I. Lenin, democracy was nothing more than a power play to make oppressed people think they weren't oppressed, a subordination of the minority to the majority, an organization for the systematic use of force by one class against another, by one section of the population against another. Cuba's dictator, Fidel Castro, said, "I find capitalism repugnant. It is filthy, it is gross, it is alienating, because it causes war, hypocrisy, and competition." Perhaps the late Venezuelan socialist leader Hugo Chavez framed it most starkly. Capitalism leads us straight to hell. What capitalists call democracy is not democracy at all, Marxists say. If it were a genuine democracy, they say, it would focus more on the proletariat. If the history of Marxist states is any indication, though, the Marxist idea of democracy is anything but the rule of the people. Remember, Marxists see communism as a state of perfection in which government will not be necessary. The ideal state for the Marxist is no state at all. Any remaining government is a sign that class antagonism has not yet been cleansed away. Lenin said, referencing Marx, the state could neither arise nor maintain itself if a reconciliation of classes were possible. In the transition from capitalism to communism, however, the state remains a necessary evil. Marx wrote, "Between capitalist and communist society lies the period of the revolutionary transformation of the one into the other. Corresponding to this is also a political transition period in which the state can be nothing but the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat." There are 3 steps in the transition from capitalism to communism. The first step, instituting statism, using the government to seize the means of production and indeed all sectors of the economy from private businesses. 2. Suppressing capitalism. Capitalists must be prevented from rising again. Lenin said, "We must crush the bourgeoisie in order to free humanity from wage slavery. Their resistance must be broken by force." In addition, the dictatorship of the proletariat will require confiscation of property. All of this will be accomplished through the guidance and governance of the Marxist Party. And 3. Dissolving the state. Marxists say the state evolved at a point in history when it was necessary, and it will cease to exist when it is no longer so. Eliminate the bourgeoisie and you can eliminate the state. Only in communist society, when the resistance of the capitalists has been completely crushed, when the capitalists have disappeared, when there are no classes, only then the state ceases to exist, and it becomes possible to speak of freedom. Freedom, in the Marxist sense, means no government at all. Lenin continued, "So long as the state exists, there is no freedom. When there is freedom, there will be no state." Some Marxists are uncomfortable with Marx's and Lenin's talk about crushing their enemies. They say it was exaggeration for the purpose of making a point, or they point to examples of capitalists crushing their own enemies. However, the political history of Marxism, from the October Revolution of 1917 in Russia to the Tiananmen Square student uprising of 1989 in China, and more recent crackdowns in Cuba, Venezuela, and elsewhere, showcases Marxism's ruthless, efficient killing machine. Talk about crushing is not hyperbole to Marxists. The death toll of Marxism stands at more than 100 million people, as devastating as a modern-day Black Plague. Marx and Engels do have contemporary intellectual and political disciples. The most common critical approach in universities is a neo-Marxism focused on the key concept of dependency. The idea is that a core group of capitalist countries, such as the United States, Japan, and Western Europe, have structured international relations so that periphery societies remain exploited, underdeveloped sources of cheap labor and raw materials. The core does this by encouraging a local capitalist core in national capitals, such as Brasilia, Nairobi, New Delhi, which runs the capitalist machine to great profit on the backs of their fellow citizens. The periphery remains dependent on the core for its very survival. This type of argument is precisely that made by contemporary political Marxists, particularly in Latin America, such as the Castro brothers in Cuba, the late Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, Evo Morales in Bolivia, Rafael Correa, Ecuador, and Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua. These political Marxists have used the core-periphery distinction to justify statism and suppression, just as their forebears Stalin and Mao did. The result? The nationalizing or takeover of key industries and the suppression of individual freedoms. And we'll stop there.